Set it to record to the cloud. And as the others come in,
Right.
hopefully their technology will let them join us this evening. And Christine, you want to go on and get started?
Yes, I will. All right. So, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our third tour of faith. This is our third tour of faith. The first two tours are on our YouTube page so that you can go on there and watch them back. They're quite interesting. Um, so tonight we have Lorana, and she is going to share with us a tour of a cathedral in Ecuador. And so this is I like learning about different faiths, but I also do like touring and seeing the historical some of the historical areas. So of different countries and different regions. So Lorana, I will let you go ahead and take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again for joining me on today's virtual field trip. Excited about it. There were a couple of things that really excited me about this particular adventure. And let me first talk about the Atlantic Institute. I'd like to point out the connection that the Atlantic Institute believes in fostering a global community through education, interfaith dialogue, and meaningful social experiences. And today really kind of hits on all of that. And I will be sharing with you about the old Cathedral of Cuenca, Ecuador. Um, and a little bit different today. Sometimes I do a really nice presentation that's really threaded together. Today, I've got several things and a couple of rabbit trails that we're going to go on. I've got some videos and imagery to really show you the inners of the cathedral, some of the just um, grandeur of the cathedrals. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, a little bit about the history. And then one of the things that just really struck my fancy was there is a type of organ that's in this cathedral, probably the only one in the country. And I said, I don't really know what that is. I mean, I understand what an organ is, but I don't know anything about old cathedral organs. And I went on a little bit of a rabbit trail. So I'm going to take you on that so that you too will learn a little bit more about the organs and the inner workings of how this worked, because this is a 5-man organ, 5 people, in what I found out in history that it takes to play this organ, or back in the day when it was being played as part of the religious community. And
You know what's
then,
interesting is 2 years ago there was a couple different other tours we did, and one in DC and one some and those organs. There was huge. It was interesting the history of all these different organs. 5 people it took to play. Okay,
yeah, there was one
all right.
person that was responsible for the melody, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then I'll show you a little sampling of what that would have looked like. Just the labor intensity of church back then. Your volunteer committee would have had to have been quite proficient. And then we'll talk a little bit about the architecture and the influences that the Spanish colonizers had on things like the buildings, including the cathedrals. And so, as I'm giving you a little bit of history today, I thought I would allow you to look at some of the imagery that I have available and picked out for you all to share with today. Um, as I began really researching, this is one of the cathedrals that I visited when I first came here. And what has happened to it since, I'll kind of go to contemporary history before we go back in history. But it is a religious art and artifacts museum now. A new cathedral was commissioned. In some of the other events that I've done and shared with you on Cuenca, I talk about Parque Calderon. It's the park in the center of the El Centro, which is like the downtown, but the old world downtown area of Cuenca, Ecuador. And I've even, in some of the past field trips, showed you or scanned or talked about the new cathedral. But back in the 16th century, this was the old cathedral. And so I'll be playing some of the video clips and some of the imagery of that as I share the history with you. So let me put my sharing on and give you a little bit of a scenic visual tour as we begin. Da, da, da. Bear with me. Thank you for your patience. And I'm starting with, uh-oh. Is everyone seeing on screen?
Yes, I can see that.
About the name before I get that started. It's known here in the community as the Old Cathedral, but you may also see or hear this particular cathedral called by the name that translates in Spanish as the tabernacle, the Iglesia del Sagrario, or the tabernacle. And this was built in 1957. So this is a building that has been standing for hundreds of years. 1557. 1957 is not that far away. 1557, and this church was built just a year after Cuenca was founded by the Spanish. And so I'm going to start this, and we'll share a little bit of that with you and a little bit of the imagery of this. You'll notice the carved doors, the bell towers, the colored glass, the archways. The frescoes, or some of the paintings that were preserved, are back from the 1500s. The organ that we'll talk about later. These are the ceilings as you go in that are painted and have been restored now. And some of the original paintings were able to be preserved.
Wow, that's gorgeous.
Church. These, again, part of what the colonizers did was they built them on old Incan ruins, usually places that would have been holy places for the Incan culture, and they replaced them with the Catholic Church, the cathedrals. This would have been their main place of worship. One of the strategies of the colonizers was to take and convert the indigenous people in the area. This would have been the central part of their community, as a place for gathering, the religious traditions. It would have been a place for solitude, a place of connection. Over the centuries, the cathedral has undergone various changes and restorations. Originally, this church was adobe with a thatched roof. It was later then reinforced with both stone and brick. And as the community grew, so did the cathedral. In the 19th century, around the 1800s, it had outgrown this, and the new church was commissioned. But one of the things I found out was there were well-to-do families that funded this cathedral and decided to keep this cathedral in its form, even though a new cathedral right on the opposite side of Parque Calderon was being built. Today, this particular structure functions as a museum of religious art, and it's known for the variety of altars and the history and some of the paintings that have been preserved. This is part of Cuenca's Historic Center, and it was named as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO in 1999. It's one of the most visited places in Cuenca, and definitely one of those emblematic places that people think about. This is the only church, they believe, in Ecuador that has a bellows organ. And it's located in the back of the building. It was used as the accompaniment instrument for choirs, and it is now no longer in service. The construction only took 10 years to complete the original church, and the stones for the foundation were from the walls that were a part of the Incan ruins. So they would have taken those stones and built the edifices because they would have been in the area. This was the main center or the main parish for the community, and it was reserved for the people of Spain, and the indigenous people would have had to stand outside or worship elsewhere. So even in the day, the church would have been a segregated place that the colonists would have been able to use the church, but not the indigenous people, even though there was much intention on converting them. The organ that we'll talk about in a little bit was introduced in 1739. There's a clock that was located in the tower in 1751. And it was officially changed from a church to a cathedral in 1787. And new towers were erected as a commemorative gesture.
Is that what makes that a cathedral then? If they add towers to it versus a church?
I don't know. I didn't take that rabbit trail, but they're said that the towers would have been modeled after the Torre más celebre que las pirámides de Egipto, or that the towers were more famous than the pyramids of Egypt. Egypt is the new tower when that's on the placard that
Oh,
was
look at that
put on the new
staircase.
tower.
That's
where a rectory or someone would have stood above. If you see the chairs,
right.
I've gone there for concerts and the pews are no longer there, but that is the organ there in the back of the church. Those pipes that we saw in some of the
Right.
other visuals up close, that's those pipes there in the back of the organ.
What the heck are those stairs made out of? It looks like huge. I'm like, I know you got your script and you're going, oh, look,
This
there's
is the entrance into the crypt. They have the stone off of there on display. These are statues that are full-size, almost statues. It's kind of a little bit creepy, but once you realize, okay, those aren't real people. Okay, you got it. The 12 disciples and Jesus. These are some of the artifacts, the religious artifacts that are a part of this. Some of the things that would have been in the churches back in that time. Very
that's a little
ornate.
creepy because they are big.
They're full size. Oh, they're full size. This is the front of the church. This is the front of the church.
Wow. Yeah,
And
that's
they're kind of descriptive.
right. Wow. That's
Yes,
kind of interesting
very,
to see it full
very,
size.
very descriptive. And like I said, today it is a museum for religious art. So some of these would have been in the church at the time, the things that you see in some of the places around the church, the paintings that are there in the church, of course, but these are also artifacts from other cathedrals that may have been here in the region.
So it strikes me interesting that even though there was part of the walls were built with the Inca ruins from the natives that lived there, the natives that lived there were not allowed
and then they could
inside.
not come into the church and worship in the church.
Parts of the buildings of their previous church places of worship was part of that building. Interesting.
Yeah. The perspective looking back.
Very cool.
One of the field trips that I did was the Corpus Christi and the replacement ceremony for the winter solstice ceremony, the Inti Raymi. And time again, it's been the efforts to wash out their original culture. But this particular church, El Sagrario, the old cathedral, this is in the center of the community. It's in the center of Cuenca, even by today's standards. This is the center and the hub of quite a few of the city's celebrations. These structures, the amazement for me is that these are structures that are hundreds of years old and in just fabulous condition. The architecture, the construction, but if you look at some of the pictures of the doors, these doors in actuality probably 12 or 15 feet high. They're carved wood doors that are solid and beautifully preserved It is amazing to walk into them and see just the grandeur of that. The ceilings that I was showing you, one of the frescoes in there is from 1573, perhaps the oldest in the country, they believe. That these things have withstood time. This church is a church that grew. As I mentioned, it started with bricks and thatched roof, but as the community expanded, the church and the needs of the church expanded too. And so there have been several expansions of this church since the 1500s. It began in 1557. But over the years, over the several hundred years that this was an actual church in function, it would have expanded, and this is the final size and structure of the church before it was decommissioned. There's a process where it's either officially commissioned as a church or not, or a cathedral or not, and it has been decommissioned from that status. And that's probably what would have allowed them to become a museum in its place. And so as colonizers came in, it was every Spanish settlement would have had a central square. It would have had a church that would have been ordered to be built. Usually, as the custom was with this one, they built a church, an orchard, and a cemetery. That would have been very traditional. That some of the carvings on the door would have been very traditional for Spanish settlements, that would have been then the hub of the community. In this particular community, the houses of nobility are also right around this square that would have been next door to the cathedral, or right around this central square for the cathedral. And then the cities would have expanded from those centers. This particular church has got a white facade, and it occupies it's a half a block right there around Parque Calderon. I believe that's the east side of Parque Calderon. The doors, I talked about the carvings on the doors, but even the symbology that's carved in. For this particular church, the carvings are symbology of forgiveness of your sins. That's the theme of the carvings that are on the doors of this particular structure. And it also includes 4 chapels. And again, this would have been built by the wealthiest families of that time. And they would have dedicated it to their saints, the saints that their family would have been honoring, or the Virgin Mary. Their relatives would have been buried in those crypts. The wooden altars, the gold leaf that covers it, those would have been things. The statues would have been commissioned by these kinds of well-to-do people within the church. And so that's part of the organ parts, that this is an organ that 5 people would have been playing. 4 for the bellows, which is where the air enters and gives sound, and then 1 person for the keyboard who would have been in charge of singing the melodies. The organ was obviously a very important part of the church, and a well-manufactured organ could last for generations. And these are people that would have been artisans. They would have known the craft of organ making. And so even that was a form of art, the actual parts that went into the cathedrals. And this is one of the jewels of this particular cathedral. Among the treasures that the cathedral also houses are the catacombs. The tradition of the time allowed for a cemetery in the back. And in this case, there were 2 spaces. One was for powerful families, priests, and then another for other people of lower social strata. The belief, not only here, but previously, was that if the remains rested in the church, they went directly to heaven. So that's why many people also did this as much as possible, because if your remains rested within the church, then your people went to heaven, I guess on an express route, which is quite interesting. It gave me a new appreciation for why they would have kept those bodies, like in the basement of the church. In this particular one, they have the stone that they replace and have put with plexiglass so you can look down in there on where the remains would have been organized. But this is definitely part of the Spanish footprint in Latin America. Definitely a part of that footprint. Again, some of the artistic relics. Some replicas and some of the work there. Now, this particular museum is open, and like I said, this is one of the most attended events or structures here in Cuenca as part of our tourism now. They're open throughout the week and on weekends. I've had the privilege of going here for one of the cultural concerts. The university puts on a concert, and it is quite grand.
Hey, quick question. Is any of that heated or
Sure.
cooled? Is any of that like heated or cooled?
How
Was
don't
it?
remember. Well, part of it is probably not. In Cuenca, most homes,
Right.
and I would imagine the churches, don't have or really need heat or air conditioning. So it's not typical here to have central heat and air. Most
Gotcha.
houses, this is an aerial view, most houses here
Right.
don't have either or screens on the window. Cuenca
Right.
is about 8,000 feet up in the Andes Mountain. We're about 2 degrees south of the equator. The weather here is 70 to 75 degrees just about year round. They call
Right.
it perpetual spring. So if you
Right.
can imagine spring or fall, sometimes you need a sweater, sometimes you can have on a tank top, sometimes you need a windbreaker, sometimes it's rainy, sometimes it's
Right. Yeah.
cloudy, but it's always spring or fall. It's always temperate. I wear flip-flops every day, just about year round.
Yeah. Well, I was just
And
thinking with all
so,
of these ornate buildings and all these ornate things, like the airflow, air circulation, sometimes, there's something that's even just back in the day, they figured out different ways to help move air. Thinking of some of those crypts, you might want to move air a little bit
yeah, yeah.
and stuff as
And
well.
part of it is the structure that
Right.
in some of the videos, as you look up to the ceiling, that's probably 30 to 40 feet.
Right.
And some of the new cathedral is even bigger. And
And
so when you
sometimes I
stand
know,
out and see those domes,
yeah,
several hundred, 300 feet up in the air. So you're talking equivalent of, 200 feet. What is that? How many stories is that?
20,
If the
20
ceiling's
stories.
10 foot,
Each
you're
foot is
talking
10.
about,
You're talking about 20 for 200 feet.
yeah.
Yeah. And I
So,
know that sometimes that's that heat that rises up there too. And sometimes if you have a dome at the top open, it helps pull the air. I mean,
and
there's
if you
science.
if you look at this aerial view, you can see a bit of the structure. So let's see if I can visually guide you through what this compound actually looks like. So to the left of the screen is Parque Calderon. You can see some of the geometric shapes that are into
Right.
the brickwork of the park. But this white structure that you see all the way just about halfway, or it's really more than about 2/3 of the way down this block, you'll see these roof lines. You'll see the tower. This was a later addition to this structure. And to the right of that, you'll see a roof line, you'll see a courtyard, and you'll see another roof line. And that would be typical, that there would be a courtyard. That could be a monastery. It could be lots of different things that space would be used for. But you also see behind that dome those areas of the church. This particular church, I believe it's 4 different chapels that are within this. Most of the pictures that you saw were the main chapel, where those statues are way, way in the front and that organ is way in the back. There's side wings that let you in and out of there. Those stairs where a rectory or someone would have been speaking would have perhaps been projecting what was being said from the front, because again, we're talking late 1500s, 1570s, going into the 1600s and 1700s. all the way up into the 1800s when the new cathedral would have been put into service. The 1900s, where the new cathedral was finally finished and put into service. So this structure is a massive structure. But right beyond the church, the next roof line you see between the church and the corner. So you see the church, that's all of those white buildings. But the next one, all of that originally is the Mansion Matilde. It's a mansion, it's yellow, and that would have been the high social elite. If you were anyone of prominence, world leaders that would come here during that time, you would have stayed at that mansion with that particular Spanish family. These were socialites. And so these structures, even by today's standards, that person's home, it would have been a single family home, grand,
Right.
grand.
Yeah. Grand.
The amount of just labor that would have been required to maintain those kinds of structures and these kind of edifices, not only to build them, but to maintain them. Being here and being in these buildings and these structures, there's not a lot of things in life these days, in my life. No, in life as a whole, the kinds of things that give you awe, that you
Right.
just go,
Yes.
whoa. Standing
It
in these cathedrals is that kind of experience.
it
And
reminds
then
me.
understanding what was happening in the 1500s and who were building these structures.
Right.
Let me
It
give you the
reminds me.
sad story. Go ahead.
Yeah, it reminds me of my father, who is from Cuba, but this area was colonized by like Catholics, so Spain, Spaniards sometimes as well. But I know that his great great grandfather or something had a sugarcane plantation, and my father said he remembers the stories that he was told about how the second floor of their house, the second floor of my great great grandparents' house was gold walls, like gold plated, like gold
Mhm,
wallpaper.
mhm. Like gold
So
leaf.
gold leaf, like it
Mhm.
was very, very ornate in
Yeah,
that as the showy, I would say the showy display of one means of wealth or something
yeah,
that I
yeah.
just some find is just not necessary. But I find it very interesting how that's that Spaniard kind of touch. There's
The,
that
the
influence.
altars would have been wood with gold leaf
Yeah,
over them. Um, if you can look at just the structure of these buildings, the height, the width, the amount of real estate
yeah,
that these
even
buildings,
the balcony
um,
sections of top of this, like all of that, the ornateness is very interesting. And then we had this discussion last week. I was with somebody. I don't know if it was with you and the other, about how that's like some of the stuff that existed over in Europe is why the pilgrims came here to this country, because they weren't wanted to escape all the ornateness of things and have things very simple without all of the all extra ornateness to structures, to places of worship. They just wanted it strictly, you know, four walls and pews, and that, it was very different in the way the architecture took.
yes, yes. So here's the sad part of the history, that in this particular community, Cuenca, the Catholic Church was one of the largest slaveholders. History says that right outside of the city is where the slave breeding plantations were.
Right.
And so when you think about that, for me, um, putting that into perspective is like bookends. It's recognizing that that they first located this on Incan ruins. This would have been where the Incan civilization would have been. There's some talk that it may have been their holy places. So you take their holy places,
Right.
you make sure you finish leveling it,
Right. You level it and build
and
on top.
mhm, take the foundation stones,
Yeah.
build your edifices by using slave labor that you've either brought or captured.
Right.
And then you strip the religious heritage of the people and call it paganism.
Right. And this
Even
was
though by today's standards, this would have been highly, highly spiritual. I've
right,
recently gone to some of these celebrations just to see the contrast and to see them on the top of Pachamama Mountain. And it's saying we first give homage to the air and the wind and the
right.
earth and the sun and the water. We take our feet off and stand here because the energy that this restores, this the circuit, the cycle, the circuit of life. Um, uh, and then to realize that those are the bookends to what we see in all of this grandeur. And while the grandeur for me is amazing, it's amazing to see these massive structures, the blocks, the real estate that these compounds are sitting on. They're fortresses
Right.
that they
Yeah.
are in the middle. Take any city that you live in, go to the middle of the city square, and
Yeah.
commandeer the entire block, because the big cathedral, the new cathedral, takes an entire block all the way to both corners and all the way back. And I'm talking about one of those long blocks, not one of those short blocks. And then
Yeah.
to realize this and to walk in and to see the glitz of the gold and the interior of these grand domes, or to walk up the stairs huffing and puffing the whole way. They got spots where you take a break to get to the top and to be able to look down. That picture that I showed you, you're actually up that high looking down over this square.
I
It's
was just thinking, what if you
amazing.
left something in that one corner of, like that one corner of the building over there on the left, and you were and like, oh, the having to go walk from one side to the other over here is just, whew.
Amazing. And so some of this is bittersweet, but some of this is exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about an understanding. This was a time where there was not tolerance, that we wanted to
Right,
force everyone into our box for reasons that were less than righteous,
right.
for
And
reasons that were really about our not our, but the colonizers. um
control, I would go with the most.
we can
It was
call it a lot of
common.
things, but
Yeah,
greed
it was
or
common even in
just
when I toured in Turkey. When we toured some of the places, we learned how the rulers, they sanded over the previous empire, so everything was buried. All the ruins and everything were buried down below, and they
yeah,
built their new empire on top of the,
yeah.
and it was just kind of like, then, somebody else conquered something, they sanded over all of that. I just like, what the work? They'd
So
call
for
it, and they'd create another faith, and they'd create another, they'd meld, and like some of those, the rulers would marry two or three wives of different faiths and then try to bring them all together to create
Mhm.
another. It was just kind of very interesting to learn.
So part of this is about not just sharing the pretty feel good parts,
Right.
the pretty parts that look good, but it's also about understanding that when we are not tolerant, when we
Yep.
will not have the conversations and learn to appreciate, to compare, to contrast, but to appreciate our differences, we have the potential of being here again. Pretty
Yep.
buildings, but underneath the very foundations of these buildings are things that are so different than the principles we say we support. And so I think it's important to see both sides of that. And I want to take you on a little rabbit trail because I did not understand what a bellow organ even was. And I don't know if you do too, but I want to show you about how this organ works. And it'll give you a little bit of understanding about why it might have took 5 people. And then I've got a little clip of someone actually playing the organ. It's not with 4 people operating the bellows, it's one man operating the bellows. So perhaps a smaller organ, but I want to share that with you as well. And then I'll open up to any questions. I'll look through my outline to see if I missed anything that was really burning that I wanted to share with you. And then I'll check and see.
These
All
four
right.
total bellows are designed to provide enough air to play the organ under a variety of winding conditions, and that's done by one person. They have music score here typically to know what's being played and when more demand might happen on the wind system. And this is done by pumping one bellows at a time. And this is done in a relatively slow and even pattern so that the fluctuations of the wind are kept to a minimum to keep that's going to affect the music and how that's played. So as you're moving from one pumper to the next, wind is being sucked into the bellows, while back check valves are always providing that the bellows that have been pumped are providing constant wind to the organ. So by the time you get to the last one, the first one's in position usually, and you just repeat that process. And depending on how much music's being played, depends how fast you need to pump.
And then we'll take just a few minutes to really hear what that sounds like. So take a listen. And so this would have been a 4-man bellow organ. I thought 2 minutes of that was ample sharing. Were you able to get a better understanding of what a bellows organ is by seeing that? This
Very
particular
interesting.
organ would have had 4 people with pedals, and that was for the purpose of being able to move the air through those pipes. These pipes that are, 10, 15 feet, 20 feet, some of them high. And those people would have been doing that. One of the things I saw says they would have had some kind of something similar to a score to be able to know what the music was. And they would have been looking at something like that as the organist would have been playing and singing whatever the particular song would have been. Catholic music is oftentimes kind of somber and slow. That particular piece that we were listening to would have been Bach, but that would have been the type of music, that Baroque type music that would have been playing on that organ. And still, even to this day, that you could go into Catholic masses and hear that kind of music, the style, the timbre, the somberness, and the melodies that would have been playing. That just was, for me, it was just a rabbit trail of one of those things that you see and you don't really know what that means. You think of an organ and you think of I think of a Hammond B organ, a gospel organ, but it's a contained unit. But I've been in churches where there've been these massive pipe organs. And so this particular cathedral, in some of the pictures that you were able to see, that entire back wall all the way across was the organ. And so when you go into it now, you kind of look back, but it's just this place. And then you think of the sound that fills this place. The opportunity that I had to attend an event there, since being here in Cuenca, was a concert. The University of Cuenca, the chorus, did a concert. And so you hear this music in this space, and it truly, truly was amazing. And so now with it as a museum, many cultural things, music and art and other things of that nature are held there, and individuals are able to go and experience these places. This is one of the amazing architectural feats, as I can't even express that enough, that this community has to offer, that these buildings from this is mid 1500s that are still standing and in really good repair. The doors and these intricate carvings are just massive, 15, 20 feet tall doors that have been carved in wood. That would have been harvested here, teak or other kinds of things that would have grown. They would have had the wood to be able to do that, the bricks that would have been made, the stones that would have been used, all of it just quite grand experiences. And I'm so grateful for being able to be here and share some of these experiences with you. Some of the pretty pictures, but also some of the stories about how we have or how we have not coexisted together well, especially people of faith. And so I think I will stop there and open it up to any questions or comments, or just how did that hit you? How did you feel when you saw the structure and the elements of it? And just thinking about these things. So I'll stop and open it up to questions or comments or feedback on what you saw or heard today.
If you want, you can stop sharing your screen. That might help too.
Oh, let's
We
do
have
that.
all these. We have all these ads up here.
There we go. There we go. Back on the regular screen.
I thought I think I shared some of that stuff, but I think it was quite interesting to read, to listen and learn a little bit about this. I think sometimes it's even interesting to know where I'm at, that down south below me in this part of the world, there's these huge structures. I know there's society all over the world, but it's just interesting how ornate some of that stuff is.
Yes.
Oh,
beautiful. Yes, Cynthia. Cynthia, did you tell us where you're from? Put it in the chat for us. Anybody that came in late, tell us where you're from. Put it in the chat so we can track that with our events. Yeah.
I just
amazing.
It's quite amazing to see the culture of the area. And I think sometimes for us living in the US, we don't have old things. We don't have a ton of old history. So I think sometimes whenever we travel across different countries, it's always so very interesting to see the old historical buildings and the old historical homes, and it's the walls built and things like that. It's quite interesting for that. So I think I enjoy seeing that when you can, it's good to learn about those things.
Any
Anybody
other
else?
questions, comments? Very interesting. Thank you for letting me share, especially the bellows. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for
William
letting me
said very
share.
interesting narrative and video, especially the Bellows, Oregon, and important to remember
Those
all
music.
aspects of history. I think it's interesting, and I'm pointing with my fork, but um I think it's interesting. I can see maybe why there were 5 people, because that's a very physical organ to have to operate. So I can almost see like where it might take a few people to step here and step here and step here and step here and step and just, um it's quite interesting. All right, anything else? And Cynthia said, yeah, there's not much respect for our historical buildings. Yeah, yeah, there's not very much. All right, and Karen said, thank you. So glad to see the organ. Very interesting how they played it. So yes. So thank you so very much, Lorana, for this tour of faith. It's kind of interesting to see the history of it. I find it interesting, if you guys can look in our videos in the back, a couple of 2 or 3 years ago, there's a New Hampshire, there's a couple of historical places that I did some conversation on, and it was very interesting how they kept the crypts, how the church had a cemetery across the street, or in Baltimore where there wasn't a lot of property, the cemetery was below the church. And there was one, we did a conversation in DC where the cemetery, where the officials, the clergy, the cardinals, I can't say the Pope, but like the cardinals and higher ups, how they're buried in the church. They have their crypts, their mausoleum in the church. That's where
It's
they're
so
buried.
that you go straight to
Very
heaven. I
interesting. Yes.
didn't know
Yeah, yeah.
that before
Very
this
interesting.
research.
Yeah.
If you're buried in the cathedral, you go to heaven faster than the people that's buried in other places. I just found that quite fascinating and a little bit amusing that, if you want to get to heaven fast, get buried in the basement of the church. So that was just my own personal, religious humor. Someone posted in there about the respect for the historical buildings. That is something that is paramount here, even in the communities, the patriarchal homes. Like, there is a lot of respect for that, and being able to renovate. Like, they take care in wanting to preserve heritage. Um, uh, I went to a dinner last night in one of the neighborhoods, and the restaurant has preserved and renovated this space, but part of it, they have left the exposed stucco bricks, like the old world bricks with straw and stuff in it. They've
Oh,
refinished it, but they've maintained that surface. They've put some coating on it to preserve it even better. The original beams, wood beams that are, rough cut, hand cut, but like the
right. Yeah.
stucco bricks, you still see houses that they're still standing, and that they've taken care to preserve them. Like, there is that kind of respect, but this is also a culture of people who use, you can get anything repaired. If a zipper breaks, if you
Right.
need your car
There's a way
seats
to repair it.
reupholstered, or your motorcycle seat reupholstered, or your clothes fixed, or made, tailors, or repairs.
It's not the
We don't
throwaway
have an
culture.
active recycling system, but there are individuals who will come by every day. They will go through the garbage and collect out the recyclables. I've started now segregating mine. Once you kind of scope it out and watch what's happening, but there are certain people that come and get plastics. There are certain people that come and get card. Like, each one has a specialty for what they do. And I make it a point, because usually I haven't taken my stuff downstairs, and I'm usually seeing them out of my window, and my water bottles, because I'm trying to hydrate. But I want them to take them. And so we have a relationship now where I've now got a box. And I told the guy this morning, is one of the older men that I see on a regular basis, if I have them, I'm going to put them in the box down there, so I don't have to throw them off my balcony at you, which is what I've been doing. But it's like, I thank them. Thank you, because I'm being more ecologically responsible when someone's recycling the stuff that I'm choosing to use, knowing the consequences. I'm trying to hydrate. There's a certain kind of bubbly water, the water agua con gas, that I can, I'm trying to do better. I'm trying to do better, but it comes in plastic bottles.
Right. Yeah.
And then I got a collection of plastic bottles, and it's like, sometimes you have to make choices that aren't the best, but this is the way to mitigate that. And this is really one of those community values of using things, not just using it and using it up, but using it and preserving it so that it lasts on and on and on. And I'm talking about vehicles. I see many refinished Datsuns. Some of you are of the generation of me. I remember when Datsuns went away. Datsuns were no more. I remember a Datsun 240 ZX and Datsun trucks with the stick shift in the floor. They're still driving them, and they're still in, pristine kind of condition. They've reupholstered them. They've painted them. They've repaired them.
Right.
The cars, you don't see them raggedy and running around. One, you can't have raggedy cars here. Your car has got to be trustworthy to be around here, because no telling where you be, what the roads conditions will be like, or what have you. But that care of taking care of things, not just I'm using it till it's, use it till it use it all up, and then you throw it out because it's disposable. This is a culture of what's the word?
It's not the throwaway culture. It's the culture of
I want to say spendthrift or frugal, but that's not it. It's of valuing what you have and preserving it so that you can keep having it year after year after year. To see the ruins here, to see the ruins and to understand how old they may be, and you see these foundations still standing firm. The structures may be gone or deteriorated, or as you understand, those bricks have been repurposed. Those stones have been repurposed intentionally.
Yeah.
After the spaces were leveled.
Right.
But to see those remains that still are standing, and they're still standing strong. They've put these stones together so that those foundations, the outline of those places, are still standing strong, is amazing. I went on a tour, the last celebration of the Inti Rami, which is the winter solstice. It goes on, everything here goes on about a week. If we celebrating all week long. And the last of it was the walk to Pachamama. Pachamama is Mother Earth. And you go up Pachamama Hill, but in order to get there, you go down the Ruta de Incas, the Camino de Incas, the Incan Trail. The stones are still there for this section of the Incan Trail that I walked on and climbed up this mountain on this steep back and forth trek that you get to the top, and it's a plain with this 360-degree view of the Cajas Mountains and the Andes. But to realize that this road of transport that the Incans literally walked on, the stones are still there. The road is still there. Yeah. You got roads in your neighborhood that aren't there 50 years from now, 10 years from when they put it in there, it's got potholes. But to realize the longevity of this.
Mommy. Oh, shoot, Lorana, I meant to mute myself. I muted you. I'm sorry. I went to mute myself. Sorry.
Some parts of that, of being able to walk on the Camino de Incas, this road that was built generations, so many generations ago. This culture is a culture of respect, not just for the structures, to see them still standing, but the Incan heritage that's here, the culture of the people. It's not a wasteful people. It's a people that does have respect and honor, because these are things that the earth has given us. Like that holistic standpoint that says that take what you need. It's the potluck principle. Take what you need from the earth, but take knowing that others also need to take from this earth. Like I see that so richly in the culture here. And part of that has to do with, even to this day, understanding the history, how these artifacts of life, of the real history of the people, are being preserved. There's a respect. There's a financial investment that's made to preserve that. And when you think of a developing nation, you think of poor countries, poorer than American countries, at least in talk,
Right. Yeah.
that we realize that this is where their investment is, an investment that's about the people, that's about the heritage and maintaining that. And that for me feels good. It feels like the right direction for where humanity needs to go back to. And so sometimes we can learn from the past to be able to help us move forward. And for me, these experiences are some of those experiences when I'm able to see them honestly that are giving me the lessons to be able to move forward in life. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for you all this evening being able to share them with me. Any last minute questions before we close out our time together today?
I'm grateful that you're there and that you're doing all of this, just, because I believe this feels quite helpful. So
Well, thank you all for joining me yet again for the latest field trip. Let's see, August field trips that I will be participating in will be American Artist Appreciation Month. One of the local artists here in Cuenca, Ecuador, happens to be an African American male artist from Augusta, Georgia.